Welcome to another Science Audiovisual Tutor brought to you by yours truly, Ronique Bernard. Once again, we are now presenting another human and social biology lesson. Our topic for today is excretory system and homeostasis. Preview. The word excretion is used when discussing the elimination of salts in sweat. Excretion is the elimination of the waste products of metabolism from the body. Now, this is the definition for excretion. So, sweat is both an excretion and a secretion. The skin excretes water, salts, and traces of other substances in sweat. So therefore, the skin is also considered to be an excretory organ. Now, we're going to look at what happens in the kidney. Let's take note of the structures. So we have a left and a right kidney. We have another tube running from the kidney to the bladder, which is called a ureter. We also have the bladder. Basically, this area stores the what? Urine. Now we also have the outer opening of the bladder. So we also have a tube running from the bladder, which is referred to as the, or otherwise called the urethra. Alright? Now I'm going to ask you once again, you may take your pencil and your paper and you may draw this structure. If not, I'm going to place this picture on your worksheet. So as you're watching what's happening in this section of the lesson, all I'm going to ask you is to use your pencil and trace whatever you have observed. Okay, let's get ready. Now, first and foremost, this red circle here represents impure blood. Now, this tube right here coming down where you see the impure blood is called the aorta. Now you know that the aorta is a blood artery running from the what? The heart. And therefore the aorta carries impure blood to the kidney. Now branching from the aorta is the renal what? Artery. So the renal artery is the tube that carries the impure blood directly into the what? Kidney. Now let's pay attention to see what happens. Good. So you notice now that the blood traveled along the aorta and then along the renal artery and it enters the what? Kidney. Alright. Now if you notice now that this blue circle now represents what? Purified blood. So obviously when the blood entered the kidney, it was purified or cleansed by the what? Kidney. And then guess what happened? The blood is also what? Deoxygenated. Good. So and that blood is carried back to the body. The purified blood is carried back to the body or back to the heart as the what? Renal vein. But not as the renal vein, but by the renal vein. So let's try that once again. Now, so the blood entered the kidney as it was impure. Then it was purified by the kidney, and then the purified part of the blood returns to the heart or back to the body by the renal vein. Good. Notice what happens now. So the other portion of the fluid now that enters the kidney was what? Urine. So basically what happens is that the impure blood, the blood that enters the kidney was filtered, and that which is pure returned to the body, and the impure part of it traveled along the ureter and then into the bladder, and that is basically called the what? Urine. So these yellow circles represents the what? Urine. All right, and that is filtration, separating pure blood from impure blood. All right, now we're going to take a very good look at what happens inside the kidney. Now note, once again you can see this is the renal artery, and then this area right here is called the Bowman's capsule, and then this tubular curved is called the proximal convoluted what? Tubule, and then this loop here is called the loop of Enel, and then this curved area is called the distal convoluted what? Tubule, and of course the blood is carried back by the renal vein. Now these little tubes, narrow tubes, are basically what? The capillaries which branches off from this area right here. It is actually called the glomerulus, right? Right here. Good. So let's pay close attention to exactly what happens inside the kidney. Now basically this entire thing right here is really the nephron, right? It is a nephron that is inside the kidney that actually does the filtering. Okay, let's go now. Here we have our impure blood. Let's notice now what happens right here. Good. Now, what happens is that the blood enters a region in the kidney called the glomerulus. Good. This region right here is called the glomerulus. Good. So that's supposed to be a O and not a U. So that is called the glomerulus, right? This area right here. Now what happens is that now what the spinning effect that you saw a while ago is refers to the ultrafiltration. Now what ultrafiltration basically is that, take for example, you have your strainer. So the strainer would be like the surface of the it would be like the surface of the Bowman's capsule. Good. And what happens is that when you put your hand on pushing down on the substance on the strainer, you realize what happens. That juice starts to what? Pass through. Good. Now, so you pressing down on that substance is really what we call ultrafiltration. And by pressing, you're creating a force with your what? Your hands. Good. So that spinning effect that you see came in creates that force. And then what happens after that is simply this. So you have now our filtrate, right? Good. So the pink object will represent our filtrate. Now, what do you think is inside of our filtrate? Our filtrate contains waste and useful substances such as water, salts, and glucose and other substances. So therefore, this pink object is our filtrate, which consists of water, salts, and what? Glucose. Alright, let's erase our board. Good. Alright, so continue now to pay attention. Good. So you notice now that the filtrate, it moved from the Bowman's capsule into the what? Proximal convoluted tubule. So this is Proximal. So the proximal convoluted what? Tubule. Now what happens in this region right here is my question. Alright, you might be wondering what this purple substance represents. Now this purple substance represents glucose, water, and salts. Notice what happens? The glucose, water, and salts move from the what? Filtrate into the capillaries, and then what happens now? Reabsorption. So reabsorption takes place where? In the proximal convoluted what? Tubule. Right at that region, reabsorption of glucose, water, and salts takes place in that region there. Alright. Now, let's see what happens after that. Okay, the filtrate now continues all the way down to the loop of what? NL. And what happens right at the loop of NL? Now this blue substance, right, blue object rather, represents water, pure water. And what happens? Moves into the capillary once again. Okay, so guess what? At the loop of NL, water is absorbed. Good? By what process? Osmosis. Now you know what osmosis is, don't it? So osmosis is the movement of what? Water molecules from a region of high concentration to a region of low concentration. Concentration of what? Water. Exactly. So when there's too little water in the body, then a lot of water will return to the body from the kidney. But if too much water is inside the body, then at that point you'll have less water being absorbed. So we have reabsorption right here of glucose, water, and salts, and then right at the loop of NL we have reabsorption of mostly what? Water. Some books would say only water. Now before we go any further, this orange object is representing salts. So also at the loop of NL, we have absorption of water and also absorption of salts, and that is done by active what? Transport. Now, so if you observe that the salts traveled from the capillary into the what? Tube, into the tube right here, which is the loop of what? NL. So we have water leaving the loop of NL going into the capillary, and then we have salts traveling from the capillary into the loop of NL. So, and the movement of salts from the capillaries to the loop of NL is carried out by a process called active transport, which you know is when the ions will travel across the cell membrane across the what? Concentration gradient, which is uses energy from respiration. All right. So the filtrate now has salt in it. Good. And what happens right here now? Okay, so you can see now that right here we have what? Salt. Now what is going to happen to the salt? The salt basically came out of the what? Filtrate. Now notice now. Good. So the salt at this region right here, it leaves the what? Filtrate and goes into the what? Blood capillary. Thus it will return to the body. So only salt is reabsorbed into the blood capillary at this region right there. Good. All right. So therefore now the filtrate continues to move now up to the what? Distal convoluted tubule. What is going to happen now right here? Good. Notice now, let's go back. Notice where it's coming from. Remember I told you that this represents what now? Water, glucose, and salts. So water, glucose, and salts now is being reabsorbed from the blood capillary and is going into what? Back to the what? Filtrate. Good. Good. So the glucose on the water and the filtrate is it leaves the blood capillaries and it returns to the what? Filtrate at the distal convoluted what? Tubule. Good. So now the filtrate has now entered what we call the collecting duct. Good. So the filtrate now has ended what we call the collecting duct. Now it is by this time converted to urine. All right, let's look at that again. Very good. So you notice now that a little water, glucose, and salt has been what? Returned to the blood and back to the heart and continues to what? Circulate. And of course, the urine passes out through the collecting duct and therefore enters the urethra, goes into the bladder and then therefore enters the what? Urethra. Now, this yellow substance, which is urine, is basically made up of water and urea. Now, in cases where a person might have too much sugar in their blood, when you go to the doctor, they can test your urine because sometimes a lot of the glucose will pass out in your urine. So, because the body will cause the kidney to stop allowing too much glucose to return to the blood and a lot more glucose to leave the body through the what? Urine. Alright? Another time we look at diabetes. Now we're going to look at another concept rather, called homeostasis. I'm going to ask you to look at your worksheet for the definition of homeostasis. Now let's look at the screen. This curved line, which is blue in color, is referred to as the normal level in your what? Blood. So we're looking at, for example, these blue object here represents water. So we have 4 drops of water, and that will represent the normal level or the normal amount of water to be in the what? Blood. Okay? Now notice what happens now. The blood level what? Rises. So there's too much water in the blood. So it was 4 before, and now it's what? 6. So what has happened is that when you drink water, notice that when you drink water, the water content in your blood what? Increases. Therefore it what? Rises. Now that is not good. So that level has to what? Reduce. And what is going to reduce it? Good. So a particular mechanism is carried out to reduce the level of water. Let's look at it again. Now notice now, the kidney plays a role in controlling the content of what? Water inside the what? Blood. So if you notice now, the extra water that was added to your blood was basically removed from the body by the what? Kidneys. So that water was that actually enters the bladder from the kidney, and therefore it returns to back to normal what? Level. So basically this is what happens in the body, and this is called homeostasis, wherein there's a particular mechanism to make the environment inside your body constant all the time. So if you drink a lot of water, then of course the body is going to the kidney is going to reduce the amount of water in your body by taking it out of the body and causing it to be passed out as what? Urine. Alright? So that is a part of what? Homeostasis. Now once again we have the normal what? Level. Now note, you notice what is happening here? You have less water. Now if you have less water in your body now, what do you think is going to happen? Yes, you're going to want to drink some water. Good. So the water level what? Falls. So it is less than 2, it's now what? 1. Then what happens now? The water level what? Increases because you basically what? Now, notice what happens here? Okay, hold on. So the water level will always decrease, and then you drink now. Good. To replace the water level. So by drinking water, you help to also what? Carry back the amount of water that is to be in your body. So if you urinate as often, then you must also drink as what? Often. Good? Alright. Now that is called a negative feedback mechanism. Now we are going to look at another concept which is called osmoregulation, which is of course a part of homeostasis. Now let's look at the diagram now and closely observe what is happening here. Now you notice the woman is having that could be a bottle of water. Well, it could be water. Good. Now she's drinking water. Notice what happens. Now notice, as she drinks, water gets into her what? Bloodstream. Did you see that? You could replay the video and then you see that. Good. Now what is going inside the brain now? You have some cells that we call the osmoreceptors. Now they detect that the blood becomes what? Dilute. That means that there's a lot of water inside the what? Blood. So guess what's going to happen right here? Ah, little ADH is in the what? Blood. Now the pituitary gland, which is inside the brain as well, a part of the brain that is, it secretes an hormone called the antidiuretic hormone, abbreviated as ADH. Now it causes this hormone to be secreted inside the blood. Now what it does is simply cause the kidney. Now look at this now. Good. So notice now that the water traveled towards the what? Kidney. So what the ADH causes is causes the kidney to absorb more water when there's too much water inside the what? Blood. And of course, as you know, so the water now will leave the body via the kidney. Alright, so you notice now that the blood is no longer what? Diluted, because the color is what? Get richer. So let's look at that again. So as you drink the water will appear inside the blood, and then the pituitary gland will cause ADH to be secreted into the bloodstream, and then now the ADH will cause the kidney to absorb all the excess water, and then the excess water is then passed out through the ureter into the blood, the ureter, sorry, into the bladder, and then through the ureter and out of your penis or your vagina, and that's basically it. Right? Simple, isn't it? Good. All right. So remember that the ADH is what controls the regulation of water in your what? Body. Now we're going to continue looking at osmoregulation. Now, before you saw when too much water was inside the blood, and what the ADH did, the ADH caused what? A lot of that water to be absorbed by the kidney and then passed out of the body. Now, in this case, now, when there's too little water in the body, now the pituitary gland will once again secrete ADH in the blood. But this time you'll have lots more ADH, which will increase reabsorption of water into the blood from the nephron, which is a tubule. Good. And then as a result of that, and it also induces what? Thirst, and causes you to drink lots more what? Water. Right? And of course, let's look back at our diagram. So here we are seeing where the water level what? Falls from 2 to 1. Now we are saying that the brain induces ADH, a lot of ADH into the blood right here, and it will cause you the kidney will reabsorb. Well, this time you're urinating, so you'll have less water, and then the ADH will also cause you to what? Drink. And here it is. This man is drinking water to replace the lost water. Good. And that is it. And that is osmoregulation. So basically, osmoregulation is about controlling what? Water that based on your osmotic what? Pressure or potential. Good. So therefore, let us summarize this again. So what happens is that when you saw only 2 water droplets, it means that the level of the water did fall or it got low. And then now ADH is secreted into the blood and then cause the kidney to reabsorb water, to cause the kidney to allow water to return to the blood, and then it also causes you to what? Drink more water. And that's basically osmoregulation. Okay, now we're going to look at another concept, regulation of blood sugar. Now, what we mean by regulation of blood sugar, we simply mean we're controlling the concentration of glucose inside your blood. Now, let's observe how this is done. Now, first and foremost, this is your what? Liver. And of course, this picture is representing or depicting your pancreas. And of course, this oval shaped figure is representing your bloodstream. Now, notice now we're having a buildup of glucose in the blood. Now, this is where the glucose level in your bloodstream is way too high. Now, when this happens inside the blood, something has to happen to reduce it to its normal what level. Now, let us observe what actions are being done to reduce the glucose level to its normal level. Now note, this starry-like object is called insulin, which is an hormone secreted by the pancreas whenever there's a group of cells in the pancreas, which is called the islets of Langerhans, which detects when the glucose level has increased. And then what happens? It causes the insulin hormone to be secreted. Let's see what happens here. Good. So just a while ago, you saw a secretion of the insulin hormone into the bloodstream and it went straight into the liver. Now, what is this insulin going to do to the liver? Now, what it did, the insulin caused the liver to absorb the excess glucose and turned it into or convert it into what? Glycogen. So what the insulin does, it causes the liver to absorb excess glucose and convert it into glycogen. And now you have the level at which the level of the glucose or it causes then the right amount of glucose to be inside of your what? Blood. So simple. Now in this case, what do you think is happening in this case? Yes, the glucose content is what? Low. So guess what is going to happen right here? Alright, let's observe and see what actions has to take place in order for the glucose level to return to normal. Once again, we have another hormone which is secreted by the pancreas. Now the name of that hormone is called glucagon. Now what does the glucagon do? Alright, so you saw that the glucagon was in fact secreted by the pancreas and it entered the what? Liver. Now, notice now that in the liver we have what? Glycogen, which is stored glucose. So glucose is stored in a substance called glycogen by the liver. But what does the hormone glucagon do? Wow. You notice what happened? The glycagon caused the liver to break up the glycogen and reconvert it to what? Glucose. And then it returned to the what? Blood. And therefore, the glucose level in the blood basically what? Is back to normal. Good. Wasn't that easy? Yes, it was easy. So notice now that homeostasis simply is basically maintaining a constant environment in the what? Body. Good. So one could read it as homeostasis is the maintenance by self-regulating processes of constant conditions in the body in spite of varying external influences. In other words, if you should eat a piece of cake, which has a lot of sugar in it, a lot of glucose in it, your glucose level will increase. And when that happens, the pancreas will do what? Yes, it will secrete insulin, and then guess what? The insulin will get into the liver and cause the liver to store excess glucose into glycogen. And then, when you're not eating anything for a long period, guess what will happen? Your body tend to feel weak and so on. But guess what? Thank God you had some glucose stored. But what's going to happen is that the pancreas will realize that, hey, there's not enough glucose in the blood. So guess what is going to happen? Then what is going to happen here is that the pancreas will secrete another hormone called glucagon. And that glucagon